So I'm here from the University of Michigan to talk about free and unrestricted text, the first look at the promise of the Text Creation Partnership. In April 2011, the Text Creation Partnership, which I will tell you more about in a moment, announced that just over 2,200 XML encoded 18th century texts were now available free of all restrictions. They could be used by anyone for any purpose, which was big news. Previously, these were accessible only to the libraries who had paid in to support their creation. So what I'm going to talk about today is sort of the story of what happened next. There are a few parts to this story. One is a lot of, or at least a start of, innovation and experimentation with these texts that wasn't possible when they were locked down. It's also a story of the discovery of unexpected chasms between our project's scope and what people actually wanted from us. And I would be lying if I didn't also admit that it is a story of some existential anxiety of a long-running project that in the past has been pretty successful, sort of facing a new stage in its life and perhaps a change in its mission. So let's step back for a moment. Some context might be useful here. The Text Creation Partnership is a library-based initiative to produce XML encoded editions of early print books, in particular matching machine-readable, searchable, structured text to books from databases like Early English Books Online, 18th Century Collections Online, and the Evans Early American Imprints database. So if you've ever searched an EEBO and you've used the full text search, you've used text from the TCP. You might not have realized it when you did. This project has been around for a long time, around 12 years, and in that time we've worked closely both with commercial publishers and with libraries. This is kind of what we do, the kind of special feature of our project. In short, these publishers, like ProQuest and Gale, grant us permission to use their page images. These are then manually keyboarded to create machine-readable text and then encoded in actually SGML using a schema derived from TEIP3, so an older version of TEI. And that's just because the project started so long ago. But we're still using what was chosen at that time. This work is funded in large part by academic libraries who pay in to become partners in the project and then co-owners of the texts. And the model is that they immediately gain access to those texts and the right to load them locally and work with them, but they all sort of agree that for a period of time, only paying partners will have access to them. And then at some point down the road, that sort of gate will be opened and everyone will be able to use these files. That's sort of the world we've been playing in for many years, and we're kind of approaching the date where this will all be changing. One date that a lot of people are looking forward to is January 1st, 2015. This is when the first 25,000 EEBO-TCP texts will become available. What happened this year was a small subset, like I said, 2,200 texts from ECCO-TCP came out, so I'm going to talk about that now. This wasn't really planned, but the 18th Century Collections Online TCP project just never really took off in the way that EEBO-TCP did. We couldn't get as many partners. And in the end, we're not able to go forth with the project. It just kind of ground to a halt. In part, this was likely because Gale actually already offered a full text searching option in their own interface based on OCR. And we could go down whether that OCR is any good or not. There's actually recently an article published in 18th Century Studies about the fact that the OCR isn't very good. But in the end, because that option was already there, it sort of made it harder for us to convince libraries that the whole thing needed to be keyed again from scratch. And so the project sort of came to a stop, with the result that we had these texts, these files, that had been painstakingly created, all dressed up, but no one could really use them. Only a small population of people who were already partners sort of had that right. So I mentioned a moment ago that all the partners in the TCP project sort of agree to keep the text to themselves for a while and then to make them available. Kind of refer to this as an exclusivity period. And in a project that is working, it serves to kind of reward and serve the interests of all the people who have invested in the project. Supporting libraries get the reward of immediate access. The corporations like ProQuest and Gale, who both give us a lot of liberal permissions to work with their resources and also a lot of financial support, they have a window where they get to be the exclusive kind of purveyor of this resource, and that kind of makes them happy, gives them a return on their investment. And key to the whole point of this is that there's a clear limitation where the period ends, everything goes free after that. That's like central to the model. What we discovered was that with ECCO-TCP, This was failing in all three places. No new libraries were signing up, so there was no incentive for them. Gale wasn't selling them, so they weren't taking advantage of their exclusivity. And when I reviewed our contract, we discovered that sort of because the project ended early, the terms of the exclusivity period just were sort of fuzzy in a way that made me quite uncomfortable. So it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, and there wasn't any way for folks who wanted to use these texts to get them. It wasn't right. So we went to Gale and we kind of just presented them with our reasoning, and they allowed us to just kind of cast off the exclusivity period, open the gates, and go forward, and to invite anyone to use and to share these texts. And was there much rejoicing? There was sort of a little bit of rejoicing. In fact, the reactions to this news were quite mixed. There were a lot of reactions. It was exciting. It caused quite a stir for a few days there in the sort of DH community. From the group that we might call power users, or that I think of as textperts, there was a lot of eagerness and jumping in to work with these files. At one end of the kind of spectrum, we had folks doing transformations right away to make easy to use, easy to find, easy to grab sort of editions of each work. So we'll look at this more in a minute, but very quickly we had TEIP5 for all of the books and EPUB for all of the books. That right now you can just download them. I'll show you that in a minute, but ultimately they might even be available from Apple. At the other end of the scale, we had folks who were just really interested in digging into the data and analyzing things like really at the character level to find patterns of error rates that then could be corrected. So from folks who just wanted editions of the books to folks who really wanted to do kind of linguistic analysis, there was a lot of interest. However, from your more average user who just wants to find a word in the text, they were actually really frustrated. Because we said, here, take all of our XML. But what they wanted was a search bar to search the corpus, find some answers, and then actually view the text online. So there was some curiosity about what did we really mean when we promised these free and available texts. What they didn't seem free and available to many people. To explain this a little further, you might be familiar with the distinction that Richard Stallman has made between free beer and free speech. Yeah. Free beer means it doesn't cost you any money. Free speech means you're not restricted in what you can do. And in fact, we were actually doing both of these things. We weren't charging for the texts, and we were saying you could do anything you wanted with them. But what we discovered was that people wanted even more. They wanted free delivery. Everything put together and placed in their hands. Now, I should confess that we weren't very slickly prepared for this announcement. As I said, this wasn't sort of part of our project plan. It came up suddenly. We were excited to share the news. And we did it perhaps a bit clumsily. We're learning from what we did. And as a result, we had a combination of things we could have done better, things we might not have done so well. In effect, we kind of like the Emancipation Proclamation made this ceremonious announcement that the texts were free, but we had little ability to actually carry that out and help people use them right away. This is one blog post that I discovered sort of complaining about this, fairly enough. And what happened is that folks rightfully commented that they couldn't find the text, they couldn't use them the way they wanted to, but they were also very confused and sort of fuzzy on the details. What format were they available in? Where could they get them? And this is all stuff that we could have done better, and that we've learned from this time, and we will do better when it comes time for the EBO text to be released. But this is just sort of an example of the kind of thing that happened a lot, that I've found a lot of online since this release. Another thing we learned from blog posts like this, or listservs, these kinds of things, were that people are not interested in reading your long press release and blog post describing what it is that you've done and all of their options. This seemed to just confuse people more. So one takeaway was that we need to just make everything clearer and easier for folks. So two ways to think about representation here. I'm trying to tie this to the theme of the conference a little bit. One thing that I want to show you is where and how the ECCO-TCP texts are being represented online. The other thing that we're starting to kind of think about and fret about is how does the TCP as a project and organization represent itself and its relationship to these texts? Do we need to deliver them to people, or do we just need to tell them that's not our problem? You need to figure out what to do with them yourself. And how do folks understand that in a way that's clear? So to start, I'll start with the easy stuff. I'll just show you where you can find them. Here's one. The University of Michigan has just put up all the files. Paul Schaffner put up all the files, and anyone can download them. You can get the SGML itself, or you can get them converted to XML, and you can just download them and have them. These are batched. Again, this is sort of very raw. These are batched as they were produced and released in real life. They just are thrown up online. You can also get plain text of all of these files. They've been stripped of their XML, and there's, let's see, 18th Connect has been using the plain text for their own purposes, and they were distributing that to folks. This was created actually by the disgruntled blogger that I just showed you. He got the plain text from 18th Connect, and then he put it up here on this data hub so that others could use it, which is great. But that's sort of yet another location where they are. Oxford, Sebastian Rotz at Oxford is the one who did the EPUB and the TEIP5 that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So if you just want like one copy of a book to read, you can get it from here. It's publicly available. I'll give a link at some point here where you can actually find the URLs to get all these things. Now here we have what people actually wanted. Artful at the University of Chicago has the texts loaded up into their philologic search engine, and you can search them and browse them and read them there. University of Michigan as well. We host them and have them indexed and searchable. The problem with our version is that they are linked to page images from ECCO, and so we have not yet been able to open this to the public because you have to be an authenticated ECCO subscriber in order to see the page images. So that was one thing that was confusing to people and it's frustrating for us. We're trying to figure out how best to handle that problem. And we're not done yet. There's also some open linked data. Keith Alexander took the metadata that was here and he created some open linked data with it so that ultimately what we hope will happen is that ECCO titles and authors and such can all be kind of linked together. And there's even more happening. I just heard last week from Perseus that they want to load up the text in their archive as well. So this kind of brings us up to date with this project. So this troubles me a little bit. I'm thrilled that so many people want to use the text, that they're available in so many ways. And this kind of represents for me, I think, the promise of public domain, of open access, of digital humanities. You make something available and anyone can do whatever they want with it. In the end, making something better and more useful than any of us at the TCP could have done on our own or has the capacity to do on our own. This is like what we want to see happening. But I don't know about you guys, all of these windows make me a little stressed out. I think, yeah. It's interesting though, I mean, of course, I did this, I created this on purpose for dramatic effect. But it seemed to me that with all of these kind of places to look and places to find these texts, this might not be that different from what the desktop of somebody trying to work with the ECCO-TCP text might look like. You wind up with all these windows open, not sure where to go, not sure what to find where. So this, of course, might be a bit worrisome to some of us. It was certainly worrisome to the folks at the JISC digitization program. They posted a blog post on the subject earlier this summer. They were actually looking specifically at EEBO, but in this case, their theme is easily expanded to relate to the ECCO example I'm talking about today. They're very concerned that when you've got multiple versions of these different archives, how will you know which one to use? How will you know which one to trust? Who do you cite? Where do you go to? And then amping up kind of the emotional impact here. Which one do you trust? In some ways, I feel the same kind of stress about this. Obviously, all of those windows are a bit confusing. On the other hand, I disagree with their sort of implication here that there is always a best one, a canonical one. The whole idea is that they serve different purposes. They do different things, all these different kind of instances. And in fact, the examples that I showed you were all quite basic. It was either download the files or search them. It wasn't even getting into the possibilities that David and Tanya talked about, doing more intense, analysis and representation of the text, which is what we hope would, eventually be the kind of thing that would be done. So far, we've just been interested in data producing it. That's what the TCP does. But now that there are so many places that it's represented, Do we need to be worried? Is our goose cooked, so to speak? Forgive my excerpt from an 18th century book here. I don't think so. I don't think we're destroyed here, but there is a lot to think about. And I guess that's kind of why I'm here. I'm hoping you might be able to help me think about it. Notes about what it is that I want you to help me think about. That would be good. Right, so we actually did a blog post responding to that JISC blog post suggesting that we were not so worried about all these different archives, these different locations, because our aim was never to create a place, a destination. Our aim was to create this body of data that could be used. It could be flowed into any number of projects and locations. And that's true, that's right. And yet at the same time, it seems like we could also benefit from bringing them together in some ways. You know, if one person makes a lot of corrections, they find some errors and they correct them and they improve the data, wouldn't it be nice if those corrections could be disseminated to others using the text? I think it would. So there's some sort of balance that needs to be struck here between the freedom for anyone to really do whatever they want with these, and we don't want them all coming through us. They shouldn't have to do that. These are in the public domain. There aren't any restrictions. We don't want every person to come and check in with us before they use the text. We want them to just do it. And yet at the same time, I think it'd be great if there was some way to help keep track of these things, help bring together improvements and corrections, or help people who just for searching find something more sophisticated, more, you know, some kind of greater interpretation of the text that might also be useful for them. And this is kind of the fence that I'm sitting on right now, this sort of uncomfortable, ambiguous place. So I hope that maybe you can help me figure it out. Yeah, I think maybe what we've done here is sort of similar to folks who maybe publish data sets to go along with their articles. So if anyone has done that, I'd be interested to hear sort of how you feel about it, or even how you just get over kind of the emotional feeling of wanting to put your data out there for anyone to use, but also feeling like you created it under really specific circumstances and you're afraid that something will, you know, sort of giving up control and maintaining control in a way that helps people is sort of the place we're sitting right now and trying to figure out. So I guess that's where I'll leave this. I would be really grateful to hear from folks who have done this kind of thing and help us with some suggestions about even just how to think about our work going forward. Thanks very much.
Questions and comments, please.
I haven't done this sort of thing before, but just as a subject bibliographer, I guess I would sort of think of this issue on an analogy with there are many different editions, many different scholarly editions of works, and they get reviewed in the journals, and they get talked about, and there's then societies that share information across. I think the scholarly kind of infrastructure is perhaps there to share that information, and I wouldn't be all that worried about different editions existing. You can get edition reviews, you know, I mean, already there's an infrastructure there to review databases. Yeah,
I so the good stuff just sits to the top through this process of reviewing.
But not necessarily a top and a bottom. It could be that some editions are good for purpose A, and other editions are good for purpose B, and other ones are good at tracking errors. They've developed a way that you can easily see where errors have been corrected and so on. So this is the one people should go to for that, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that's something that I often try to remind myself of when I'm fretting about these things, is that nobody tries to control every version of Hamlet that's out there. You know, there are the ones that are used and that are sort of respected and known, and then there are other versions that you might use, but it would be up to you to figure out if it's reliable. And I think you're right that the same might be true here. I guess the sort of other part of this that I think I'd like to think more about is there a way that corrections improvements could be distributed to the others, you know, because they're not these static print objects. Like if we could pull in things that were fixed in one and somehow push them through to the others, that would be great.
So your dilemma reminds me of what's happened in the open source software community. And if you look at like how open source software development projects were run about, say, 10 years ago, the notion that you would fork a project, forking was a dirty word, that because it was for many of and people cited many of the reasons that you cited, that people wouldn't know which project they should be contributing to. There was this split in the community. There'd be end users wouldn't know what was the official version that they should be using, and so it was considered very disruptive if somebody took the source code and created a variant version of the project. Now that's completely changed, and working projects has become the main way that people now collaborate around open source projects. And the difference has been a move from centralized version control repositories to distributed version control repositories. And I could see that working very well, because I think in this case, because I think the problem of these different, all the windows you showed, is not so much that those different projects exist, but that they've downloaded the XML from your site, and then something happens kind of out of sight, and then it pops up again someplace else. And what's the problem is kind of making out links between what exactly happened between here and there. Mm-hmm. In a distributed version control system, people explicitly say, I'm taking this version of the text that you put out here, and I took it on this date, and then I made these changes, and all that is explicitly cataloged, and then anybody else who has different versions can say, well, I like the changes that those people made to these texts, and those changes that these people made, and I'm going to incorporate those back in. There's automated tools to do that, but I'm not going to take those other changes because those aren't relevant to me or whatever. And so nobody is the authoritative source, but there isn't a need for it because you have tools that allow you to manage the complexity of these kind of peer projects, and then you have tools for sending those changes back and forth. So that might be a model that you could explore.
Yeah, thanks. That sounds great. That was a really useful explanation. You know, of course, I'm aware of version control and stuff, but the sort of model you just described of all kind of equal projects pulling from each other, I think makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Any comments, questions?
I also think there's a way in which, sort of what you're describing is your limitations of your office, and all of these things. But it might be an investment on your part, especially as you're anticipating this sort of piece, to really have someone whose job, partially, is to encourage these projects to make a response about what they're doing, to be more explicit and transparent about it, and then having some of that information for you all to be just managing that aspect of it. So doing it in a technical sense, but also doing it in more of a sense of if a lot of these projects are using the data that you've freely given out to the world, a lot of these communities are already talking about what they're doing with it, and maybe in some sense they can talk about what they're doing and give that description back to you. So someone in your office should maybe necessarily have a space where you're describing, so giving those links to describe, and you can vet it. So you don't have to do but the important ones are what they've done, or really, because then that requires you guys to also think about what they're doing and anticipating what might be done.